This episode is brought to you by Ollie. Ollie's 2 new fitness gummy rings are a delicious way to maximize your exercise. Pre-game Energize gets your body ready for a worthwhile workout. And post-game Recover helps you bounce back when the action is over. Learn more at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Experience Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania in 3D.
Scott Lang, you have a daughter. You're an Avenger. But out here, you're out of your league.
On February 17th,
Kang's a monster. He can shatter existence.
an Avenger
I don't care what he can do. I'm getting us home.
must face a conqueror.
You may not want her to watch this.
I'm sorry, Cassie.
Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Experience it in 3D. February 17th. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13.
Listeners, we need you to imagine something. You're single. I know it's hard to imagine. You've met someone. You've been on a few dates and you've been texting a lot. And then one day you kick off conversation where you left it the day before, something friendly, maybe a little flirtatious, and tumbleweed. Nothing. No response. Later in the day you think, maybe they're just busy. So you send a little nudge like, hey, busy? By the evening you're starting to think this needs something must be up. They need to hope not too worried. They'll give me an explanation. Next day you're maddened that there's still no response. And this cycle continues, and you're faced with a sense of humiliation that you've just been ghosted.
Oh my God. Welcome back, guys. Welcome back to the show. And apologies because to some extent we sometimes ghost you on a on a monthly basis when we don't get episodes out. But we're working on doing that to a more regular schedule. Obviously, I'm Jake, and this is the morality of everyday things. And in today's episode, we're looking at a very everyday moral issue, which is, of course, when is it acceptable to ghost someone? And we'll define all that. And we'll go into some we'll go into some psychology and some interesting stuff there.
I love this because it's a very practical question, and I have some strong views on this, and we will come to this.
We will definitely come.
So, Jake, I'm sure that you'll ask me what's your view. For context, I am single. I am very often playing the dance where, you're texting for a bit or whatever.
Playing the games.
So, yep. Oh, well, no, not playing the games, just the old back and forth, it's part of dating.
Especially with online dating and all the apps, Anthony, all the apps. Here's a quick definition just to kick us off, just so we're all on the same page. I mean, ghosting is pretty common parlance, but for the avoidance of ambiguity, ghosting is abruptly ending communication with someone without explanation. The concept most often refers to romantic relationships, but can also describe disappearances from friendships and or the workplace. And that's from Psychology Today.
Wow. Can I very quickly tell you the worst ghosting story I've ever heard?
The next thing was I was going to ask you, have you got any funny stories of ghosting or being ghosted? So jump ahead.
Here we go. That's perfect. Again, first of all, a terrible one. A friend of mine's sister, Charlotte, if you're listening, hey Charlotte, was dating someone. So she'd been seeing this guy for a few months. They'd seen each other maybe 10 times plus.
He lived
outside
amount
of
of
London.
times.
So it would be like weekends together and stuff because he lived outside of London. And then apparently one day they were supposed to meet up and he just texted like, oh, sorry, I don't think I can make it, and never texted again. And the worst thing was, I said to her like, maybe he died or something. And she was like, no, I still see his Instagram stories. And I was like, oh my God, like the man has no shame.
Oh, man.
And now that's just a sad story. But now kind of funny, a morbid one. So apparently Charlotte's brother has a friend. Apparently all my ghosting stories center around them. Has a friend, and apparently he'd been dating someone for a while, and she invited him to come meet her family. And the night before, he just got super wrecked and slept in past his alarm and missed it. And he woke up to like tons of calls and texts like, hey, where are you? Like, what the hell? You're supposed to meet my family.
Was this the first time he was meeting them? This was the first time he was meeting the family?
Yes, this was the first time he was going to meet her family. And he was just so embarrassed, he just never spoke to her again.
What?
That's the dumbest reaction I've ever heard of, right?
Genuinely. So he just, wow, that's so 0 to 60.
Yeah, just doubled down on stupidity and rudeness.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but sorry, some context from that article. There was something you wanted to say on that, right?
Yeah. Well, you've kind of, the Instagram thing about Charlotte was is a good link to that, because it says here, again, Psychology Today, people respond to being ghosted in many ways, from feeling indifferent to deeply betrayed. Some believe that ghosting is inseparably intertwined with modern electronic communication, and the practice is a way to cope with the decision fatigue that can accompany dating. But others believe that ghosting is emotionally troubling, given it offers no sense of closure. And I think that's the painful thing about that story you were saying, where, you have these options to stalk people, so you can see it's not like this guy, this guy's still out there living his life. He just, for no clear reason.
And you're being reminded of that fact.
Yeah. There's a sort of pain to that.
I'm gonna jump ahead and talk about this. So I think the problem with ghosting is that, yes, it's particularly painful because it's a very non-human experience to have a conversation with someone where they just don't respond, right? Because people don't do that in real life. There's nothing worse than like bumping into someone who's ghosted you and they just talk to you politely as if they didn't ignore your message, right? And so it's a weird, non-natural, non-human way to interact with people. However, I think part of the reason it's so uncomfortable is because it doesn't reflect the way that you actually communicate with people as a human, right?
Yeah.
As a human being, when you talk to someone, no one just elects not to respond. Right?
Well, that's the thing. If you think someone's ignoring you in real life, you always have that kind of like, what, can they not hear me? Like, what's and that's so rare.
Exactly.
That's like maybe at a party, a kind of like, someone might see you, not really acknowledge you, and already you feel a sort of sense of betrayed hurt. You're like, what's going on with them?
Yeah.
So,
did you see that new movie Banshees of Inisherin?
Mate, I put this in the notes to talk about that because that is such a funny example of this in well, not real life, but like, yeah,
like you in real human interactions, you just wouldn't do that. You just wouldn't, like, one day when the other person thinks you have a close connection, suddenly be like, oh, I've decided we don't, goodbye. And that's the whole point of that. The whole story of that movie is that someone does that, just one day decides, no, we're not friends, leave me alone.
And I don't want to spoil it. Not that there's much to spoil, there's not much of a plot, but it's a fantastic movie. And it's such a funny concept. I mean, I guess the whole thing is kind of an exploration of like male friendship and to some extent how poor communicators men can be. I think apparently that's one of the themes, but it's so funny because it's literally like, they go to the pub every day. Colin Farrell's character's this sort of like happy, sort of cheerful, slightly like stupid guy, but he's just there and he's like, why has he not come to the pub with me? And everyone's like, have you had a fight? And he's like, no, I don't think we've been fighting. And then they just like, he finally meets up with him and he's like, why are you ignoring me? And the guy's like, I just don't like you.
yeah.
And for a while, he's like, I can't
like on a
accept
tiny
that.
island.
Yeah. He's like, no, you're joking. You're pulling my leg. And then he's like, no, I've decided I want to pursue bigger and better things. I want to compose music and you're an idiot and you distract me.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
I don't want to hang out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? That kind of arrogance reminds me. Yesterday, I was at a party, right? And there were a couple people there, right? We're having some drinks, and there were a couple people that were like, "Oh no, sorry, don't drink." And then they kind of two people don't drink, bumped into each other, and it was the most obnoxious moment of my life.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like it just oozed like, "Oh, we're so much better." I don't understand why people drink. It's like, you're in the middle of a fucking party. Like, what? Who are you trying to impress? Like, oh, maybe if I don't drink, I can be as great as you are, Mr. Unemployed. Whatever. It was so funny. It was also like one of those things where it's like they say this and then they're like like secondhand smoking. They're like secondhand enjoying our like drunk partying lively vibes.
Yeah,
right?
so selfish.
They're being a little voyeur. Like, listen, if you like, by all means, if you don't want to drink, that's fine. But then don't come to a party and pretend that it's not, that they're like, it's not more fun because everyone else is drinking.
Yeah. I mean, because it's just something that like
and being a bit lively and rowdy.
Yeah,
right?
Relaxes social settings, doesn't it? That is annoying.
Exactly.
But
like, don't act like you're not getting a secondhand benefit here, you twat. And it was just like to the face, like, mate, like, do you think you're better than me? Oh fuck, yeah, it was a really annoying moment. And that kind of like, I remember I had that feeling when I was watching that movie where it's like, oh, he thinks he's so great. He's playing a little bit of fiddle. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. To bring it back to the episode, the way we're going to tackle this is I'm going to talk through a little bit of psychology. We've got some interesting ideas to discuss there. But then I think, we should basically aim to get to a rule. And I mean, listeners, you might have your own rules. You might have your own opinions on, like, there's a certain cutoff after which, ghosting is unacceptable. There's a certain cutoff probably at which you need to be, if you're ending something, you probably need to do it over the phone or in person even, send more than just a text. People will have rules on these kind of things. But yeah, I want to get into that. I want to see where we stand.
Yep. I would like to say quickly my own kind of rough rules. You mentioned that article earlier, some believe that ghosting is inseparably intertwined with modern electronic communication, and the practice is a way to cope with decision fatigue that accompanies dating.
Mm-hmm.
I actually kind of agree with that. Like, I personally think, I use the term fizzle, right? It's fine for things to fizzle.
Mm-hmm.
That's not ghosting. That's just fizzling, right? If ghosting is when someone asks you a question and you don't respond.
Yeah, there's a sort of non-mutuality about it, right?
Yeah. Whereas if you're just having a conversation that just kind of ends and then you just don't speak again, no one starts a new conversation, that's not ghosting.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I've had people before who kind of have this thing where they're like, oh, if they go on like a date or 2 dates and they're not feeling it, they feel this need to like send an explanation or whatever. And I actually think, because they're like, oh, because you don't want to ghost people. I actually think sometimes that's a little bit obnoxious. Like, if we've gone on one date and like it was fine, but clearly neither of us are feeling it, it's fine for it to fizzle. You don't need to send me like a, hey, it was really nice to meet you, but blah, 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 blah.
Best of luck with your life.
Not necessarily. Yeah, best of luck with everything.
I think that's fair. In many respects, that's kind of my gut sense about this too, is that if it's a sort of mutually sort of faded thing, you know, if you go on a second date and then neither of you text again, it's not like one has really ghosted the other. I think where ghosting comes into play is probably one's like, hey, so that was really great. Like, what are you doing this weekend? And then if you never reply to that, that's ghosting. And then you kind of, I suppose what the key is, like, what factors do you use at that point to determine what kind of an explanation or a breakup is owed?
That's true. And even then, like, if it's post one date and someone asks something casual like that, not responding to that, even that might not be terrible. It's a way of communicating, like, it's all about the expected mutual feeling. So let's talk through some of these theories.
Yeah, let's get into the psychology. So there was a really interesting article by psychologist Dr. Michelle Drouin. I sent this to you ages ago just because I was like, wow, this
is from TED, right?
Yeah, and there's one particular insight that I took from this. I was like, that's really cool. It sort of resonated with me. She basically posits that there are 3 important sort of psychological theories in action when ghosting happens, and they are the following 3. Number 1, we do care about what other people think, and this is not a weakness but a skill. This is the insight. I was like, holy shit, that's actually really cool, really true, really interesting, and we'll come back to that. The second is uncertainty reduction theory, which says that...
Can we take a second to appreciate the term? I don't know why, I've never thought this before. The term holy shit. How weird that term is.
Yeah. Reminds me of that holy cow meme where he's like,
Yeah, holy cow. Yeah, it's just a cow with like a free sat on. Sorry. So the first one is that we care about what other people think. This is not a weakness, but a skill. And you'll explain what that means, because I don't immediately understand what that means.
This is important. Sorry, we'll come back to that. The second is uncertainty reduction theory, which suggests that we have a need to reduce uncertainty, particularly about other people, in order to build relationships. Basically, one implication of that is we care more about people that we don't know so well. But second, it's just that sort of almost human narrative need to be like, how did things end? So imagine the situation where you've been on a couple of dates, you ask someone a question like, hey, do you want to go on a third date? And they never reply. That triggers this sort of painful sense of wondering, like, hey, what's going on? Like, why are they not replying? And that need for sort of narrative closure is an itch.
I get you. So like, there's the doubt. Like, to be fair, it's the same reason. I have been guilty of this before. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at the time I spoke to a therapist. And you know, because the common advice, for example, is, you know, don't text an ex, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have before missed someone that I was seeing and sent them a text, right? And I kind of pained over whether it was a good idea to text them at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was at the time talking to a therapist, and they said, well, think about the outcomes, right? Like what's the goods, what's the bads? And I was like, well, actually, like, I think at the moment I'm feeling a bit anxious because I'm like, oh, are they missing me? I don't know. And actually sending this message, including non-response, at least answers the question, are they missing me?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually determined, like, purely for me, to reduce uncertainty and which, you know, was a source of anxiety. Or anxiety is a strong word, but, you know, a source of discomfort.
Yeah.
That made sense. So yeah, like, we have uncertainty is uncomfortable, and ghosting leaves people in a position of uncertainty because it's like, oh, are they taking a few days to reply, or are they not interested?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes it's in some way more painful, but like, it's better to, you know, get punched than it is to sit around waiting, wondering if you can get punched. Often the anticipation of the punch is worse than the punch.
There's a certain truth to that, isn't there? No, that's fair. That's a really interesting example. The third theory that links them all together is kind of an obvious one, which is just that we're social animals. We crave human connection. And when you kind of take all these things together, it provides quite a compelling psychological explanation of why ghosting can hurt so much. We crave connection. Ghosting is a sign of weak connection. More than that, we crave closure, and ghosting leaves ambiguous what other people think of us. And what I meant with the first point about we care about what other people think, and that's a positive trait. It's an adaptive skill. Let me explain that bit, actually, because I think that might be a missing link here. What Michelle says, Dr. Michelle, is that we should care about what other people think. As humans, we definitely spend a good time thinking about what other people think of us, and it's not a bad thing. It's an important adaptive trait that means we can cooperate well as social animals. Any opposition you might feel to this statement may stem from well-meaning advice givers who, in an effort to direct you away from self-criticism and anxiety, have assured you that what other people think of you doesn't matter. But what she's saying is, that's true, but past a certain point. You don't want it to become this sort of negative rumination, the source of worry, but equally the fact that, you know, if you didn't give any thought to what other people think, you're basically a sociopath or an arsehole, right? Like,
yes, mate, I'm so behind this. Like, I also feel like there's this, I don't want to say cult of thought, but like, I remember I was arguing with someone about, they wanted to dye their hair blue. And I was like, and in fairness, I don't mind that, like, different people, whatever. I was like, oh, you know, had you thought about what it might communicate to other people? And they're like, it communicates nothing to other people. And I said, you thought about what communicates with other people? Have you thought about why you want to do that? And they're like, I want to do it just because I want to do it, and it communicates nothing to other people, right? Or like, and I don't care what it communicates to other people. And I was like, well, no. Ironically, it communicates the fact that you want to communicate that you don't care, which is communicating and wanting to communicate.
It's
right?
a paradox.
And you have consumed it as a cultural symbol, which is why you quote unquote want to. Like you in a vacuum or in a state of nature, you likely wouldn't just want blue hair, right? It means something. So I'm a big fan of this. Like, we're social creatures. You should care what people think about you. That's part of being human. And there's a negative part of that, but there's also a positive part of that. We in the office sometimes, as a joke, because I incorrectly once said, I don't think bullying is that bad. Because I was like, sometimes bullying is a feedback mechanism to stop being weird. I acknowledged that the problem was that by definition, bullying is when it's too much. It's not just negative feedback. Yeah. It's like hurtful or unnecessary or excessive, right? Yeah. So but now as a joke, we often use the term constructive bullying when someone gets a bit like, do you know the term butthurt? Gets a little butthurt about something like, oh, I was just giving you some constructive bullying, don't worry.
But it's true. And in some ways, it's nicer when that kind of feedback is explicit, because otherwise, going to the uncertainty reduction theory, if someone gives you a weird look and then you're like, oh, what's up? And they're like, no, it's nothing. You're like, what were they really thinking? What's going on? Whereas at least if you're like, I think that looks like, you've got something on your face, you look stupid, it hurts in the moment, but you take that, you learn from that. That's a terrible example, but you know what I mean. And
yeah, take another good example. And again, this isn't bullying. This is just feedback. Like, you should care about what other people think. If someone tells you, hey man, like, you need to shower more or use deodorant, like, thank you for telling me. I'm going to do something about that, right? Yeah,
and this is and all of this is in aid of our ability to cooperate socially as humans. We are social creatures. What's interesting as well, just to sort of finally sort of cap that off, our thinking in these ways can become quite complex. If you say something, you might wonder, like, what did Ant think about what I just said? More than that, you can kind of go layers above that. You can be like, what does Ant think I feel about this, considering what I just said? What does he think I think he thinks about this, considering what I just said? And you have, depending on how clever you are, I suppose, or neurotic, these layers can extend quite far. But these are complex ways of thinking that are actually employed by the most socially skilled among us to help us develop and maintain connection. This is something that we actually develop over time. If you think about toddlers and young children, they don't really consider the effects of their actions on other people. They make demands, care only about satisfying their own needs. And it's only age between sort of 3 to 5, maybe even 7, that you develop something called theory of mind, where you recognize other people also have thoughts and feelings and you might affect them, and you start to care more about those things. So I guess you grow empathy.
Yeah, well, I can't wait until I reach 3 to 5.
Yeah, I can't either.
You're all NPCs. All of you are NPCs. Non-player characters for those who don't play video games.
Exactly. So to sum that up, it's basically when people advise us not to care about what other people think, what they really mean is care about that, but to a constructive degree. Then forget about it. Don't get bogged down. Don't get sort of neurotic, anxious about it, because ultimately you want to live your own life.
Rather than don't care, it's don't care too much.
Yes, exactly. You still want to express yourself. You want to be your own person. You don't want to totally conform to other people's expectations, but equally you don't want to be this like unempathetic arsehole who just like is incapable of caring about what other people think. Otherwise you end up like Christian Bale's character in like American Psycho or something like that. So yeah,
I was really offended the other day. Someone told me that I remind them of that person. I was like, what the fuck? That's like the biggest insult possible.
That's some significant feedback right there, my friend. You need to
I know.
You need to think about what you're
they said it. I think it's just because I like was watching what I eat and go to the gym, and they're like, "You're like that guy," and I'm like, "No, it's called American Psycho."
It could have been flattering. It could be.
I'm not American.
Christian Bale.
That's how I took it.
Constructive and forget about it. Anyway, sorry, that's the psychology.
Silence, NPC.
Let's return to the key question at hand, because we don't have loads of time. We've kind of given your definition, but Ant, now that you're armed with the knowledge of the sort of psychology underplaying this and how painful it can be, what's your rule? Where do you stand on ghosting specifically? And you can apply that to romantic or sort of other relationships.
We discussed it a little bit, but like, I think it's all about how much you think it is going to affect the other person. Like, anytime that the other person is clearly emotionally involved, and that could be after 1 or 2 dates, depends how emotionally intense it was. Maybe you had sex and that's a big deal to them. If it's not going to happen afterwards, or it's not going to continue afterwards, you owe it to them, which is a really cheesy way of basically copping out and saying like it depends. But rough rules, I would say less than, and I drew the distinction between fizzling and ghosting. I would say generally never ghost, but fizzling is fine.
Yeah.
And I would also say, because I've had where like I have, told someone, hey, look, really sorry, like, I'm not sure this is right, and shouldn't keep saying, and then they'll like say something afterwards, and I may not respond to that. At that point, it's not ghosting anymore. I've made my position clear. They'll be like, oh, maybe we can still meet up or something, and I have once or twice not responded to a thing like that. At that point, I don't think it even counts as ghosting. You've made clear there is no uncertainty.
This might not be a funny story, but I feel like I recall this happening with Potato Girl.
Oh god, yeah. Just for context, Potato Girl is just, we were out for dinner and she was looking at the menu and she goes, oh my god, and I'm like, what is it? And she's like, they have potatoes. I love potatoos. And I was like, this was a red flag. I've never seen someone so interested in a basic carb. I mean, people say it like, I love carbs or whatever, but like, it was the most emphatic reaction. It was, yeah, I mean, no one should love potatoes that much.
I also love the expression red flags. I love and I kind of love the arbitrariness of like what people determine as red flags. And
maybe that was more of an ick than a red flag. Red flag is like a warning sign, and an ick is just something that makes you like, oh. Like I remember as well, an old partner used to like love porn star martinis, and anytime they'd open a menu and I'd see it, I'd be like, oh god, and they'd read it and go, oh, porn star martini, and I was like,
you're wincing already. You're like, oh no, I see what's going on. Speaking of icks, I did a tiny bit of, I don't know, just some sort of like not that serious research on this, but came across some funny examples. There was a guy who compiled this list of like annoying things of life in London. These aren't London related at all, but it's just sort of something that made me laugh. It's just like friends who text back slowly are really painful. Acquaintances who text back immediately are just as painful. And it's
so true.
And then another thing was just from Reddit. I was looking into this to kind of sample like, what's the general consensus on ghosting? Do people have sort of internet rules about this? And there's a quote here that says, I'm a female, I've been ghosted and I've ghosted. It's become part of online dating in this day and age. Here's my rules. 1, if you've met up in person, then you should send a text. I think it's horrible to ghost someone once you've broken the online barrier. If you've regularly been talking for over a month, I think also text. If it's been sporadic, awkward messages here and there, then you could maybe ghost. But if you've been having ongoing conversations and talk regularly, I think you should send a message. Then she says something about Bumble. That's actually not that relevant, but that's interesting.
Interestingly, her bar is very low. Her bar is extremely low, because she's basically like, she's talking about ghosting when you've just been talking with a stranger on a dating app. That's not even ghosting. That's just stopping talking.
Yeah, I picked this one just because this was like in response to the question that had been done on Ask Reddit. This was like the top voted answer. So I thought that was like an interesting kind of sample survey of what people think. But yeah, I think that's interesting. To touch with some philosophy, in a previous episode, we talked about the easy aid principle. I suppose it's sort of similar to Good Samaritanism, but it's basically like if an act doesn't cost you very much and it's of moral value, you should do it. And to that extent, I think, not ghosting, i.e. sending a text, just kind of providing closure, surely fits into the theory of easy aid. Would you not agree?
Yes, but I would say that like, don't underestimate the stress. I mean, Jake, you've not been single for quite a while. Don't underestimate the stress of the like soft breakup text, with someone you've not really been seeing. Like it. So I don't know that easy aid is when it's like ridiculously easy for you. But I could see some argument like, look, it's just a text. You can just send it and then close your phone. Like maybe you feel a bit uncomfortable, but grow up. And it hurts you a lot less than it hurts them.
Yeah, but I suppose you're right. There is an emotional pain associated with even writing that text. You're like, oh God, how's this person going to feel? It's I suppose it's the general human guilt you feel about making anyone feel bad ever. But obviously it's kinder to do that than just to like lead someone on forever. No, I take that point. Maybe easy aid doesn't actually apply because there's a sort of emotional toll on you even of sending a polite text, unless you've just got it saved as a template and you're like, bam, dealt with that one, on to the next.
You've gone on too many dates if you have a template.
I'm imagining one of our friends is now sort of newly in this position, so it's sort of funny watching him navigate the world of online dating and having to manage sort of. He's like, God, I think I need like a channel manager now. I need an admin assistant. Not that he's like sort of prolific, but I think it's a new world to him too, which is quite funny.
If anything, quite the opposite.
I need a lead generator.
I'd sooner. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, he needs an admin to do all the swiping, not to handle all the inbound.
Maybe both.
No, I'm just teasing. I'm sure he does fine for himself.
I liked your opinion. I think it depends on the level of emotional connection stroke sort of. Yeah.
It's all about how much you think they're going to care. Like, which could be after one date, if they're really intense and really into you. It could be, whenever. It could be It could be if you've gone on 3 dates, but it's all been very casual, no big deal.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's very fair.
Actually, better to fizzle. Like, to be fair, anytime anyone sends me direct questions, I would probably say, like, look, sorry, it's not for me. But if it fizzles, it's fine. And most people kind of understand fizzling is what that means. Cool. We should wrap up. Thank you for listening. Leave a review, share with your friend, share with your mom. And hey, maybe I'll ghost you one day.
Chat to us on, if you like as well, take that Calendly link, come chat to us. We've had some great conversations with listeners, given us plenty of ideas for future episodes. So let us know what you want us to discuss, what you want to hear about. And yeah, we'll be back soon with more episodes. See you later.
Much love, guys.
Adios.
Hi, I'm Yolanta Fawahimi, a journalist at the Daily Telegraph. If you enjoyed this episode, you might like my podcast Black Prose, where Black writers talk amongst themselves. I chat with different types of Black writers, from journalists and authors to screenwriters and rappers about their experiences, challenges, and writing rituals. I really want this podcast to become an archive for Black writers around the world, no matter where they are in their writing journey. If that sounds exciting to you, just search for Black Prose wherever you get your podcasts.